Hi everyone, my name is Ayana Gray. I am a YA fantasy author and so excited to be partnering with WriteHive to present to you the art of querying, which is a session I'm going to lead talking about what querying is, how it's done, what that process looks like, and sharing the tips that I learned from my process about a year ago. I hope you enjoy it, and some of this information you may already know, but I do hope that it's comprehensive and that you walk away learning something new. So without further ado, let's get started. Oh, there we go. Okay, so just a little bit about me. As I said, my name is Ayana Gray, and I am a YA fantasy author. I'm currently represented by Pete Knapp at Park and Fine Literary and Media. I've been with him not quite a year. I am a member of #DV Squad, which just means that I have actually found my literary agent through an online pitching event called DV Pit. If you want to know more about that, you can just visit dvpit.com. But that is how I connected with my agent originally. Last year, I was a 2019 Pitch Wars mentor. This year, I am a member of the 2020 Pitch Wars Advisory Committee member, and I'm very excited to join that community again. And I am a self-proclaimed query letter extraordinaire, which is a pretty bold statement. And I know you're wondering why and how is she saying this? And I simply call myself a query letter extraordinaire because of my query experience. It went a little less than a month, which is pretty quick in the world of publishing and querying, you'll find. And I also received my first full request within 5 minutes of sending my query, which is crazy fast. And that was actually the agent that I ended up signing with later. So I tend to think that I have a strength in query, not only writing query letters and understanding that process, but I've been able to help friends who've signed with agents and then gone on to sign book deals. It's something that I really enjoy. It's something that fascinates me and I love to share. And if you want to know any more about me, you can visit my website, ayanagray.com. So that's a bit about me. Let's jump right into querying. First of all, I want to talk to you about what it is, because I know that, if you're watching this, you may already have an idea, but some people don't. And some people think they know what querying is, but they really have maybe a small piece of it understood instead of what it is, what the big picture of it is. So the simplest way to break this down, first of all, you have different types of publication. You have self-publication and then traditional publication. Querying is a part of the traditional publication process, and it is the process where you, the writer, solicits a literary agent or an agency for formal representation. That's where they represent your interests, and we'll talk more about what that actually means later. So the querying process, it actually begins every single time you query an agent or agency by sending a formal query letter and submission materials to them. And the process actually ends when you receive a response. And there are different kinds of responses that you can receive. Again, we'll go into that a little bit more in a bit, but that is at essence what querying is. So, the next natural question is, what does a writer need for the querying process? Well, in my definition, and this is my opinion, I think you need 4 things to really begin a querying process. The first, most important, and probably obvious thing is you need a full, completed manuscript. I cannot emphasize how important it is for you to have a full, completed story. So not half written, not mostly written, not 99%. It needs to be complete. You also need a query letter, and we will absolutely talk about what that is. You need a synopsis, we'll go into that. And you need what I think is a list of literary agents that you plan to query. I think I should mention now that a lot of the things that I'm going to suggest, these are things that worked well for me and things that have worked well for fellow authors and writers who have gone through this process. It's not law, and you'll probably hear and get advice that sometimes contradicts what I'm going to say. I'm just going to walk you through what I know and what I think has worked best. So I think if you have these 4 things, you are in good shape to begin querying. So now that you know what you need, you know what querying is, let's kind of look at the process from a bird's eye view. This is the querying process, and you'll see it's involved. We go 12 different directions, lots of colors. I've actually tried to group these things in a way that makes sense to me, because I think some of these things do go hand in hand. And I'm going to break down each one of these individually. But, like I said, we start here where you've written a manuscript and we end all the way where you're signing and notifying agents of your decision. So we're going to don't worry, I know this is a lot. We're going to break down each piece of this. The first thing you're going to do is, again, might seem obvious, you're going to write a manuscript. And you'll notice that I didn't say write a book. This is a small technical thing, but a manuscript is actually something that is unpublished. A book is something that is published. So if you want to sound like you've got a little bit of savoir-faire in the publishing world, you definitely would refer to your unpublished work as a manuscript. And as you begin writing, or if you're already writing, it's totally okay, you should absolutely be aware of what genre and age category you are writing for. Trust me, you will thank yourself later if you keep this stuff in mind early on. Now, on this slide, I've included kind of a general idea of word count. Word count, not page count, because in the publishing world, word count is what matters, not page count. And this just tells you how long or short your story should be based on the age category and based on the genre that it belongs to. Yes, I know that there are lots of books that can kind of mash two different things together. You've got paranormal romance, you've got historical fiction romance, you've got young adult fantasy, which is what I write. These are very broad parameters. There's absolutely room for flexibility, but you want to aim to write a manuscript that fits within these parameters. We'll talk again about why that's important later. But that is step number one when you're before you begin the querying process. The next thing you're going to do is revise your manuscript. And I know you're thinking, this isn't querying yet. I know, but it's, to me, really important before you even begin. This is the pre-querying process, if you will. You want to, after you've written your manuscript, revise. And I'm not going to necessarily read each of these questions to you because I think you all are capable of doing that. But as you revise, think about these things. And I would encourage you to really take your time and revise the very best story that you can. Show your friends. Find critique partners online, and I do have some resources that I can share with you to tell you, where to find them if you're not sure. But really, at this stage, work to revise your manuscript and get it in the very best shape that you can. I will explain why, and I know I'm saying that a lot. I'm going to explain why. I'm going to explain why. Just trust that every piece of this process has a purpose. So at this stage, revise your heart out. Get this manuscript in the best shape you can get it in. After you've revised and gotten your manuscript in a really good spot, what you're going to do is write the 1 to 2 page synopsis. And this is the part of the session that I think is probably most controversial, because you'll hear a lot of people say, you don't need to write a synopsis before you begin querying. And I say you do. Why do I say that? Because when you query, different agents may ask for different materials, and there are agents who ask for this. They ask for a 1 to 2 page synopsis when you query. You don't know, some of them do, some of them don't. I think it's best to be prepared. It's also just a good thing to have, because if at some point your book is signed with an agent and you go to have it published, you will have to write this at some point. Better to write it sooner than later, and then you can always fix it and change it later. But for those of you that don't actually know what a synopsis is, or you might be unsure, it's just a brief summary of the story. You can find these when you look online for summaries of books. It just tells you what the book is about. It tells us who the characters are. It tells us who the bad guys are. It tells us the problems and conflicts, and it tells us the stakes. Insert character must do this or the world will end. So it tells us, at a bird's eye view what the story's about. The most important difference, because a lot of people get synopses and query letters confused or mixed up, a synopsis tells us the whole story. It tells us how the story ends. And I know that a lot of people find writing synopses difficult and challenging, because how on earth do you take your 300, page epic fantasy and condense it into a page? I recommend this. I've included a snapshot, but Susan Dennard actually guest posted a really great article called How to Write a 1-Page Synopsis on PubCrawl. This is a free resource, and it is hands down, in my opinion, one of the best ways to teach you how to write a synopsis. I believe she uses Star Wars as an example, pretty well known. So if you're stuck and not sure even where to start with writing a synopsis, I would absolutely recommend just Google how to write a 1-page synopsis, PubCrawl, and you will find it. So that is the next stage. After you are done writing the synopsis, it's time to write your query letter. And a query letter is a little bit different than a synopsis. It's one page, roughly 250 to 350 words, single spaced. And it's where you're telling your agents about your book at a very brief level, very much the way you would write a cover letter if you've ever applied for a job. So in a lot of ways, it's similar to your synopsis. We're going to be learning about your main characters. We're going to be learning about the bad guys. We're going to be learning about their problems and the stakes. But we're also going to be getting kind of a snapshot of what's called your metadata, which is the information, it sounds a bit silly, but the information about your manuscript. How long is it? You know, what genre and age category it is. See how I told you it was important that you knew your genres and age categories early? You also want to have, like I said, the word count, and you might even throw in something that's called comps or comparative titles, which are just books and movies and titles that are already existing that show that there is an audience and a target for your kind of story. The most important thing, or I should say, one of the important things in a query letter that's different from a synopsis is it should not tell us how the story ends. And I know that's a lot of information, so I thought sometimes the best way to teach or explain is through examples. So what I've done is I've shared my query letter that I used when I was querying. This is actually the query letter that got me the 5-minute response. And I should and I want to definitely make the disclaimer that this query letter is absolutely not the story that I have on my hands now. It has changed so massively. But this is what I queried Pete with nearly a year ago. And I don't necessarily have to read it. You can take your time. But I want to point out a few things that I think made Pete notice the letter and made him request pretty quickly. So we have an opening paragraphs because my story is told in 2 POVs, points of view. And these opening paragraphs tell us simply who the characters are. Kofi, character 1, is a slave, and Ekon is a newly initiated warrior. We have a little bit about who they are, what they believe, and then we have immediately they're struck with problems. You know, Kofi deals with the dark, dangerous magic after a ritual gone wrong, and then she's offered a deal to get her freedom. Ekon learns of a plan to usurp the royal family, and he has to make a difficult choice. So we have conflict and problems immediately. Again, we go into the stakes, into the second and third paragraph. We're bringing them together and talking about now there's a primordial animal that's known only from myth, tearing through the kingdom, and now the 2 main characters have to get together and deal with their conflict and their stakes. You know, they have to reckon with this monster and their secrets before the creature's secret destroys their home and destroys them. So these first opening paragraphs are really about the story itself. And I should mention that mine is a little bit different. It's structured a little bit differently because it's a dual POV story. Typically, this paragraph would be just one. But anyway, not a big deal. This paragraph at the bottom is what I mentioned before. It's a metadata paragraph, and you have the title. My manuscript is called Beasts of Prey. And immediately I'm telling you some need to know information. It is a 97,000 word young adult fantasy. So I've told you the word count, I told you the genre, I told you the age group it's for. And I decided to mention that it was a dual POV story just so that Pete knew from the beginning what he was gonna be seeing. And then I said it blends a mythic expansive world that will appeal to fans of Sabaa Tahir with the moral ambiguity and geopolitical intrigue found in books like King of Scars. I believe its female lead also appeals to those who champion a Black Arya Stark. So these are all comps. These are all comparative titles. This is me showing that there are people who would like my kind of story if you're into things like Sabaa Tahir and her work, if you're into books like King of Scars, and if the idea of a Black Arya Stark is like exciting to you. So those are comps. And that's just general metadata. This little line right here is optional. You don't have to have one, but if you are querying an agent for a specific reason, like because they expressed interest during a pitching contest, or because you noticed that they said something on Twitter or on a website once and you feel like you'd be a good match, you're free to add a line or 2 here. For me, I actually had 2 reasons for querying Pete. He expressed interest in my pitch during DV Pit, and I mentioned that. And he also has expressed an interest in high concept stories and also secretive characters. And he mentioned that on MSWL, which is called Manuscript Wishlist. Again, that's totally optional. but it's nice, you know, if you have a real reason for querying a specific agent, you can drop that in there. And then the last paragraph, really a stanza, is just a bio, talking about who you are, what, you know, you can talk about your quote unquote day job if you want to. I took my real information out, but anything related to writing, keep it brief, but just telling a little bit about yourself to kind of add some background, and then your information at the bottom. And so this is a query letter. This is my query letter. But if you're curious about other ways to do it, if you need more examples, a source that I really think is great is called Query Shark. It's run by a literary agent named Janet Reed, who works at New Leaf. And basically people send her query letters and she tears them apart and she gives advice about them. And I know a lot of people have read through those. It's a blog, they read through the blog, and it's a really great way to see what works and what doesn't work in a query letter. So if you have any more questions about that, I definitely encourage you to visit her website. So at this point, let's review. You know, you have written a manuscript at this point. You've revised it, hopefully. You have written a 1 to 2 page synopsis, and you've written a query letter. So at this stage, you've gotten your submission materials ready for the querying process, which is a huge accomplishment. Give yourself a pat on the back because that is not easy. Now we're at the part of the process where it's time for you to review your materials. And in the same way that you hopefully had friends and critique partners looking at your manuscript, I would definitely encourage you to let friends read your query letter, let them read your synopsis, find people to look over things for you and with you, and give you feedback. Make sure that your query letter makes sense. And a good way to test that, I've learned, is give your query letter to someone that's never read your book and ask them to tell you after they've read the query letter what it's about. If they can tell you what your book is about from your query letter, it means that you've written a strong query letter. The same way that you don't want to rush through revising your manuscript, you don't want to rush through making sure that your submission materials are clean, because once you send it out, that's it. So really take your time at this stage to review your materials and make sure they are in the best shape possible. Now you're going to compile your agent list, and this is the part that some of you may find pretty fun. So you're going to be compiling a list of literary agents, and I thought, you know, just for people who may not know what a literary agent does or what the point of one is, I thought I would make a quick note about that. The way it used to be in publishing, writers could directly send their manuscripts to publishing houses and editors at publishing houses. However, in the age of the internet, as more people have taken an interest in writing, it's basically become too much for publishing houses. And so literary agents came into play. I want to say, you know, early 2000s, 90s, maybe a little bit before that. Agents act as kind of the bridge between you and publishing houses and editors, etc. They are the ones who handle the business end of publication for you. You know, so negotiating your foreign rights, negotiating audio rights, deciding, you know, how many books you're contracted to write and how much you get paid to write those books. You know, it's very involved and it requires a lot of experience and understanding that you may not have because you're a writer, not you know, somebody working in publishing. And so that's where they're there to help you and represent your interests. It's important to note that, you know, while they're there to handle the business end of your work, it is also your responsibility to be aware and also be engaged and not just let them do everything. Ask questions, you know, be engaged. But anyway, something just worth noting, if that's what agents do. And it's also pretty typical that they work on commission, so they get paid when you get paid. They are incentivized to help you succeed. And they receive a percentage of your book advance and also your royalties, typically 15 to 20%. That varies depending on the agent and agency. It's also important to note that not all literary agents represent the same things. Some of them specialize in kidlit, like my agent. He specializes in middle grade and young adult work. Some agents work in adult only. Some prefer nonfiction, some prefer fiction. So as you're compiling your agent list, you should be thinking about, okay, I've written this kind of story. Who are the agents who represent what I like? If you're not sure where to start, one place I recommend is the manuscript wish list. You can organize by genre, you can organize by age category, and just start combing through and looking at literary agents who you think are interesting, spend some time there. There are a plethora of different resources you can use, but spend some time looking through the different resources, finding agents, and I would say compile a list of about, I would say 20. I'm sure there are people who would say more, but for me, I would say start with maybe 20-ish. I would also recommend, and this is exactly what I did, so just telling you what worked for me, I would recommend creating an Excel sheet and creating these columns within your Excel sheet. So you have, we'll get to tier in a second, but you have, you know, the name of the literary agent, the agency that they work at, what their submission guidelines are, and usually you'll find these on their website, and then any notes about them that are important to you specifically. So, you know, when I was doing this, I think my note was, you know, liked my DV pit pitch and likes characters that are secretive, just as a note. This tier over here is something that I do and something that a few of my friends and peers also do. It's optional, but I think it's helpful. And what you do is you rank your agents. You pick out who your dream agents are, the ones who you would just really love to work with. And then you have agents who you would like to work with and who are a pretty good fit, but they're not necessarily like the dream agents. And then you have your tier 3 agents who you still really, really like, but they aren't, you know, they just aren't the dream agents. And it's perfectly okay to have agents that you really like, that you kind of like, and that you just like. But I would definitely recommend putting them in tiers, and I'll explain why. There's a really cool strategy that you can implement by doing it this way. So after you've gotten your list of about 20 agents and you put them in your tiers and you have all of this, you know, good information about them, it's time to query. And you're like, finally, this is the querying process. We're finally getting to actually query. So it's pretty self-explanatory. If you've done your homework, this should be, you know, fairly simple. Most agents, in fact, I'm going to say all agents these days, request that you query virtually through either email or through a third party like Agent Query or Query Tracker. You'll have to pay attention to their specific guidelines, but depending on what they ask for, you'll send them your query letter, you'll send them possibly a synopsis, and you'll send them however many pages they ask for. Sometimes they say, we want the first 5 pages, the first 10, we want the first chapter. What I say here is, you know, I know it's exciting to finally get to send things out, but please, please, please take your time, do it consciously, go over everything and make sure it's right. Because once you send it, I don't mean to be, you know, dramatic, but that's it. Once you've sent it out and pressed that send button. If you find a typo in your query letter a second after you've sent it, if you realize you sent the wrong version of your manuscript or you sent a version with track changes, you can email and fix it, but it's not it's not necessarily the best first impression. The better first impression you make, the better chance the agent has of saying that's somebody that I want to represent. So I would recommend, of the 20 agents or so that you have, querying about, I would say 5, 6 of them. And I wouldn't query all of the agents I put in my tier 1, the dream agents. I would actually mix it up a little bit, because if you, let's say hypothetically, you send your manuscript to your dream agent, and then like 2 weeks later you realize, oh, I think the ending would actually be better if this character didn't die. Well, it's too late. You know, you've already kind of queried them and taken your shot. And some agents might consider you, you know, new material, but for the most part, they're going to go off of what you've already sent. So, you know, if you send a mixture of both tier 1 and tier 2 and some tier 3 and mix it up, you're not blowing all of your shots with your top picks from the beginning. So that's just a strategy. You know, not everybody does that, but it's something to prevent you from feeling badly if it doesn't work out in the first round. And there are rounds to this. Some people send 10 at a time. Some people do 5 at a time. I would say do what you're most comfortable with. After you send your queries out, I deliberately put this clock here with nothing else. And it simply is a sign, you know, a reminder that you're going to have to wait a while. Some agents are notoriously fast when it comes to querying and responding to queries, and some are notoriously slow. It doesn't mean that, you know, the agents who are fast are better. It's just that they the way that they operate, they respond to things faster. No matter what, you're pretty much always going to have a waiting period when you're querying. And it's stressful and it sucks and it's not fun, but it is kind of just a part of the process. I got my response, my full request response within 5 minutes of sending my query letter, but then I did have, somewhat of a wait after that happened. So what I would say in this time is to, work on other projects if you feel like it, spend time with friends, go do other things that don't make you think about writing, as much as you can. You're going to be thinking about it always, but, understand that this waiting is just a part of the process, and it can't be rushed. So we're going to pretend that your process has gone perfectly and in one linear way. After you've sent a query letter and you've waited a while, the next step, and the ideal step, would be that you receive what's called full manuscript requests, or they ask to see, quote, the full. If you probably have sent, the first chapter or the first 5 pages or so. If the agent reads your query letter and they like what they see in the sample you sent, that's when they'll say, I'd like to see more, please send the full. This is why early on I said it's important to have a complete, full manuscript ready. I have heard horror stories of people who wrote out a story like halfway through, sent out a query letter to an agent thinking that they were never gonna see it, and then 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, the agent's like, yep, send me the full. And they weren't ready and they weren't prepared. And that's never a position that you want to be in. So having your full manuscript ready, this is why it's important. It's totally okay if you want to spend a day looking over it, really quickly one final time. But I would say respond to a full request as quickly as possible. That's usually kind of what's expected. So you'll send your full manuscript or manuscripts out, depending on how many full requests you receive. And then you're going to do some more waiting. So like I said, this is a roller coaster of a process. It seems like things are happening lightning fast, and then, sometimes things are happening at a glacial pace. This is normal. This is part of the process. Trust in it. It's going to be okay. So after you've waited probably years in your imagination, best case scenario, what's going to happen is the agent who has your full is going to reach out to you again. It may happen 2 weeks later. It may happen a month later. What they'll probably do actually is they'll email you and say, hi, I hope you're well. I'm wondering if you have time for a call in the next week or so. Some people call this the call. But what's probably happening is that agent is asking to speak with you on the phone, to talk with you about your manuscript, and to probably offer representation. Now, there are some agents who ask for a call and it's not to offer representation, but typically that's what it is. And that's a really exciting feeling. So if you've gotten to this point, celebrate. It's a huge achievement. You'll talk with the agent, you'll determine a time to talk, and as you prepare to have that call, I would do these things. I would, number one, think about questions for the agent. There are so many resources online. All you have to do is Google to find out, what are some questions that you should ask the agent. You could have 5, you could have 10, but have some questions, come prepared. You don't want to just sit there and be shell-shocked. You also want to be prepared. They're going to have some questions for you, and you should definitely be prepared to talk about yourself and your book, or at this point it's a manuscript that you want to be a book, to be able to talk about that and talk about your goals and kind of what you envision and what you want as an author. And then also just being honest. I think on my call with Pete, one of the questions he asked me was, do you consider yourself a fast or a slow writer? And there's no wrong answer to these kinds of questions, but they're just trying to get to know you and figure out how best they can represent you. So be honest, have a real conversation, and don't be afraid. They're calling you because they want to be speaking with you. Again, this is something to be proud of and enjoy and have fun. So after, ideally an agent has called you, you have a great chat, and they say, I'd like to offer representation. Big, exciting moment, you'll hang up the phone, scream a little bit, and then you need to kind of act quickly in some regards. Actually, before you've hung up the phone, one thing you want to do is tell the agent, thank you for your offer. I will have a decision for you by this day. You are not required to notify, or to, you're you're not required to give agents an answer that very second, and they don't expect you to. Any agent that is pressuring you to answer is a red flag. So you'll tell them that, give them a decision day that you have in mind. A week or 2 weeks away from the time you talked is pretty standard. And let them know I'll let you know either way by then. After you've given them that decision day, you're going to reach out to any agents who currently have your materials, whether it's a full manuscript or the query letter just sitting in their inbox. Send them an email, change the email header. Actually, here's what I would do. Go back to your email that you sent the agent, reply or forward to that agent, and change the subject line to say offer of representation in all caps. That is something that will absolutely catch an agent's eye. They will see it, and a good agent will respond to it quickly. And what you want to say in that email is, hello, I know you may not have gotten to read my materials yet, but I've received an offer of representation and I hope to make a decision by this date. If they haven't, gotten your full yet, you can say, would you like the full manuscript? If they already have the full, just let them know that you're trying to make a decision by a certain time, and they'll respond accordingly. And sometimes what happens is agents will do counter offers. They'll also make an offer, and then you've got kind of a fun choice. Sometimes authors, what am I saying? Sometimes what agents will do is they'll politely step aside, which means they just are not going to compete with the offer that you have. So a number of things can happen from there, but you do want to make sure that you tell every single agent that you've queried what's going on. Then, so, we're imagining this process. You've notified agents, you've given them a time, a week or so has gone by. Now it's time to accept and decline offers of representation. If you've received more than one, it can be tricky. If you've only received one offer, this is pretty straightforward. One thing you absolutely want to do, just as a professional, is reach out to every single agent who has your materials. And some of them you're going to withdraw your materials from. Some of them you're just going to decline their offers, but you want to communicate and let them know. So this kind of follows up on what I just said, and I provided some examples. What may happen is you may decide that you want to continue to work on this story, or that you decided to write something else and you no longer have an interest in this story. So you have two different options here that you can word it. You can say, dear agent, thank you so much for your interest. That should be interest, not interested. Typo. In my manuscript. At this time, I've decided to withdraw my materials from consideration. And that can be as simple as that. You don't owe anyone any additional explanation. You're just letting them know you're going to withdraw your materials and they shouldn't consider them anymore. Same thing here. And I want to kick myself because that typo was there twice, but that's okay. You're just going to, you're going to say, dear agent, thank you so much for your interest in my manuscript. I have now accepted an offer of representation from another agency and would like to withdraw my materials from consideration. You're not required to tell the agent what agency. I mean, some might ask, but it's definitely not something you have to tell them. And it can be as simple as this. And this way you're being professional on your end and just letting them know so that they don't read it and get excited and offer, and then it's kind of a null and void point because you've already accepted someone else's offer. So after, best case scenario, you have gone through this full process and now you sign with your agent, and different agents have different processes involved. What I would say is always get some sort of documentation about the nature of your relationship with your agent. So something that specifically says how much of a percentage they get from your advance, something that outlines your expectations, their expectations, what the process will look like if one of you decides to part ways. Get it in writing. If you're querying, it's because you want to be an author. It's because you want this to be a profession, and so you have to treat it like a profession. Get it, in writing. Treat it, just like you would a job signing, a contract for a job. So enjoy that moment, but also take it seriously, and do take time to read over your contract and make sure you absolutely agree with it. In fact, you're totally fine to ask any agent who's offering if you can see a contract before you agree to work with them. That's completely within bounds. Any agent who doesn't, I would have, kind of raise a red flag there. So I want to talk a little bit, we're almost at the end of this, but I want to talk about what's called a revise and resubmit, AKA an R&R. Sometimes what will happen is you will send a query letter to an agent and they'll say, I love this, can I have the full? Then you'll send the full manuscript and you'll wait a while and they will reach out to you again by phone, often by email, usually by email. And they'll say, dear writer, thank you so much for your manuscript. I really enjoyed reading it, but something about the characters weren't clicking with me. I really like this. I would love for you to revise and resubmit it to me. This is a part of the querying process that I think less people know about and less people understand. It's just what it sounds like. The agent is saying that they like your work, but it isn't quite where they want it to be. So they're asking you to take it back and revise it and then resubmit it to them at a later date. First of all, I know that this may sting. It does, or it can be a disappointment if you're hoping for an offer, but you should absolutely take this as a compliment, because agents receive hundreds of queries, in a day, and the fact that they've said, I've read it once, but I still want to read it again, that's a huge compliment. If this happens to you, you can thank them for their comments and for giving you that second chance. It is kind of a rare chance. Take the manuscript, take their feedback, and really, really take some time to work on it. They're not expecting to hear back from you a week later. That means that you didn't really revise. They wouldn't, you could come back to them a month or 2 months and say, dear agent, I'm querying you again after you gave me a revise and resubmit. Here you go. And I know plenty of, even New York Times bestselling authors who did revise and resubmit, sign with their agents, and that's how they got their foot in the door. So this is something that does happen in the querying world. It's a good thing. I think it's, really a testament to how good you write, and you shouldn't be discouraged by it, but it is something that happens. So you should be aware. And then as we get to the end of this, I just want to do some quick do's and don'ts that didn't really fit anywhere else. And some of these may seem obvious, but I did want to point them out really quickly. As for do's, research, 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 and not just, a literary agent, but also research the market. I think that's something that we as creatives and writers don't like to think about and don't like to talk about is the marketing side of books and the business of books. There are certain genres and certain age categories that are, that sell at certain moments in time. And if you are a millennial, you remember when paranormal romance was the thing and it was all that was out there, it seemed. So there are things that come and trends that come. I don't think at all that you should write to a trend, but you should absolutely research and make sure that the book that you are trying to get published, the manuscript you're trying to get published into a book, has a market and has a place. You don't want to spend all this time writing a story and then there's no market for it. So research that, research the agents that you're querying and make sure that they are reputable, that they have clients who have had success in what you're trying to have success in. Do your homework. When you query, this goes without saying, but follow each literary agent and or agency submission guidelines. They are different, and there are some agencies that say we won't even look at your materials if you don't follow our instructions. So very important that you just follow instructions. And as you're writing your query letters and your emails, make sure that you're querying individual agents and make sure that you're spelling their names correctly. There are agents who will throw query letters out if the name is spelled wrong. It's not a hard thing to do. There are some agencies that say you can query the entire agency at once, but unless that is explicitly set on the website, take the time to send these query letters out, one by one. Do not do a blind copy situation. You will get rejected without even a second glance. As for the do nots, again, these are obvious, but these are things that I've seen and heard literary agents say. Number one, don't put down any other authors, books, agents, don't talk badly about anyone. This is a professional query letter, so you should keep it professional and kind and to the point. Don't overpromise, which means that's, just to say, don't say I've got the next Harry Potter book on my hand. You don't. And I'm not saying that to be mean. I'm saying that, you are a debut author. you shouldn't overpromise, and you shouldn't say, I'm going to be the next this or that. We don't know what you're going to be because you don't even have a book sold. So just be humble and say, you know, what your book is about, what you think it's similar to, but don't make any grand promises, especially promises that you really have no control over delivering. Again, obvious, don't insult agents who decline to represent you. Don't send snide emails back when they say no. I know that sometimes getting the form rejections that aren't personalized hurts, but it's not the professional thing to do, and you never know, in the future you might want to query them again, and they will remember, you know, the people who sent nasty things back to them when they said no. Let's see. You should thank agents if their feedback is helpful. And I think this is a typo, I apologize. This should be in the do section. And that's just what I said before, which is informing agents when you receive a full request. You should do that. So that's in the wrong box, but you should let agents know when you receive requests and when you receive offers of representation so that they have the chance to fairly advocate and offer themselves. One quick note about mental health, because I don't think that it's talked about nearly enough in this process. For some people, actually for most people, querying is a really anxiety-ridden process. It's stressful to put yourself out there. And so, you know, my advice is, if you are the kind of person that's prone to get anxious, and if this is going to be something that really has a toll on you mentally, there are some things that you can do to make this slightly less stressful. Things that I've heard my friends and my peers do, things that worked for them that I hope work for you. So number one, create a separate email account for your queries and your writing things, and turn off notifications for that email. Check them at a certain time, at a certain day. I had a friend with very severe anxiety who made the choice to only check her query email address on Friday evenings after her work week was over and she was safely at home. You don't have to do this, but it's just a way to kind of create a barrier, because if it's your normal email account that you have to check for school or work, there's really no way to separate it, you know, create a healthy separation. The other thing is, keep your eyes on your own paper, don't compare. You'll hear this a lot, it's really hard, but just remember that querying is not a process that takes exactly three months or exactly 2 weeks. Some people have a really quick process, some people have a fairly fast process, and some people query for years. A really, really good friend of mine queried for, I think, 2 years, sent query letters to over 100 agents, got lots of rejections, and recently, a month or so ago, got a 6-figure deal. You know, so it just goes to show that it doesn't matter how long or how short it takes. Keep your eyes on your own paper and focus on you. I would also say, find people who are querying with you. It's just kind of comforting sometimes to have other people who understand what you're going through. You create some really nice friendships that way as well. And most importantly, don't place your self-worth in this process. It's something very basic, but you have to remember that you are a person with so much to offer that isn't this story. And this may not be the story for you. It may be story 3 or story 4 that gets you the agent and the book deal. But this is not your self-worth. You have so much more to offer, and it's just not healthy to rate your self-worth on this process. So I've listed, a few resources. These are things that helped me. Some of them I mentioned, throughout. Manuscript Wishlist, the Manuscript Academy is great. I mentioned Query Shark. Print Run Podcast Query Show is really cool. It does have a price. I believe it's maybe $8 a month, but it's a podcast where 2 agents, I believe Laura Zatz and Eric Payne from Headwater Literary, they critique real queries and they talk about what works and what doesn't. And sometimes it's helpful just to hear an agent talk about these things in person. So that's a really great resource. It is, like I said, $8 a month. Really great resource for queries. Query Tracker is another great resource. Really, all of these in different ways can be of help to you. And there's many, many more, but these are the ones I thought of that I think could be helpful to you. And that's it for me. So I hope that, if some piece of this was helpful to you, maybe you knew some of this information already, maybe you didn't know some of it. Remember that this is subjective. This is a lot of my advice based on what I know and what worked well for me nearly a year ago. But don't just listen to this session. Go do some reading and research on your own and figure out what makes sense for you. If you have any additional questions for me, I'm on Twitter pretty frequently at Ayana Gray. And I'm also sometimes on Instagram at Ayana Gray _. Happy to answer questions and follow up and really help any way that I can. So I thank you all so much for taking the time to hear my session, and I hope you enjoy WriteHive, and I wish you the very best of luck with querying. You guys have a wonderful day. Stay safe.